Welcome back, everyone. And I hope that you're all as excited as I am to learn more about how we can design accessible and equitable XR experiences. So during this session, we are going to learn from Christian Cousteau, XR and accessibility specialist at Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers. Luis
That's
Perez.
it.
Luis
The
Perez.
National Conservatory of Art and Craft in France.
That's helpful. Yeah. All right. And then Luis Perez, accessibility lead at Recite. Now I'm going to go with the French accent. And Xavier Apostol, a VR developer at Immerse. All right. Thank you for being here today. And my first question is, could you each briefly introduce yourself and share your background in XR and how it relates to accessibility and equity? And Christian, do you want to start, maybe?
Okay, my name is Christian Cousteau. I'm an ICT and accessibility expert at the National Conservatory of Art and Crafts, which is a major public higher education institution specializing in lifelong learning. And I'm an accessibility and VR consultant in my own company called Elagia. I'm working in accessibility since 2007 and in XR since 10 years now. And that's it.
And I guess I'll go next. I'm Luis Perez, and here representing Recite. It's actually on the next screen, but first I'll tell you where I work. My official title is Director of Accessibility at CAST, and CAST is a small nonprofit that developed the Universal Design for Learning framework for designing inclusive learning experiences and environments. And I represent CAST on Recite, which is a National Science Foundation funded collaborative project. It stands for Resource Collaborative on Immersive Technology. And our goal is to improve STEM technician education through the integration of cutting edge extended reality technologies. And part of that is incorporating universal design for learning principles to make sure that these experiences work for everybody. And so you can learn more about us by visiting our website, Recite, RECITE, XR.org. And I'll pass it on to our next panelist.
Hey, y'all. My name is Xavier Apostol. Like Sophie said, I'm one of the developers here at Immerse and one of the many champions of accessibility and equity on the product team. It's such an honor to be here on this panel with all these amazing experts. Focusing on my XR work prior to Immerse, a lot of it dealt with the retelling of oppressed stories. So my undergraduate thesis was on VR documentary following my grandmother's experiences across the border, as well as an MIT reality hack project on historical sundown towns. And now I have the pleasure of working with all the wonderful people here at Immerse, making language immersion more accessible so people can continue to tell their stories.
Thank you all. All right, so my first question for you, Christian, maybe if you want to start, how do you define accessibility and equity in the context of XR, and why is it critical for the growth of this technology?
I have put some things on the next slide. Yeah, if I can define accessibility in XR, it's a kind of mixed between web accessibility and game accessibility, but with its own particularity. Because due to the viscerality of the medium, some of the normal accessibility in web and game accessibility are challenged by virtual reality. And I have principle and a kind of code of conduct. We need to be careful to do a human-centered design and prioritizing accessibility, diversity, and the user well-being in XR experience. There's also something very important, it's privacy and data protection. Because I don't want to talk a lot. Perhaps Luis and Xavier can save things also.
Well, for me, it's about everybody being able to participate in experiences. And so I'll give you a good example and from my field of STEM technician education. Maybe you want to learn about a wind turbine and how that works, and you're a wheelchair user. And so that is an experience that maybe otherwise you would not be able to participate as easily. But maybe through a headset-based extended reality experience, we can take you to that environment. So for me, in situations where like you're not able to go somewhere or there's some barriers that keep you from participating in that experience, XR can be one of the technologies we can use to allow you to participate just like everybody else can.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that as well. Yeah, when I think about accessibility and equity, Dylan Fox in one of the previous talks also brought this up, but think a lot about mismatches, and I view accessibility as avoiding those mismatches between an individual's capability and the barriers that exist for them. When it comes to equity, right, it's about fairness and justice with consideration for those individual circumstances. And thinking about these XR modalities, I think that really the combination of those two forms immersion. So immersion is about inviting others into the realities we envision as creators with consideration for the realities they go back to once those headsets come off. And accessibility and equity are critical for the growth of XR in general because they ensure everyone can seamlessly imagine with us.
And what are the barriers that you've encountered when creating or designing or implementing accessible XR experiences?
The first barrier is the lack of knowledge in accessibility stakes on the part of manager, designer, teacher, service provider, and clients. Sometimes I meet some teacher who said, "Oh, blind people cannot do virtual reality and immersive experience." It's false. I know blind people who are using augmented glasses to read menu, to do things. And the second problem is the syndrome of being the only accessibility expert in the place. You need to have many people with you. And the second one is a kind of organizational barrier, organization that does not prioritize accessibility at a structural level. And that's it for me.
And I'll zoom out a little bit because I come from the world of web accessibility, where we have, really robust standards like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they have testable criterion. So it's a little bit clearer what your goals are, what the standards are. Whereas with XR, we are still developing some of those standards and guidelines. And so a lot of times it's about being creative and trying out different approaches in order to make sure that, again, going back to my definition of accessibility, everybody can perceive the content, everybody can interact with it and navigate the environment, and then ultimately participate and get some learning gain out of the experience. So it's that's a positive too, right? Because we get to be really creative in how we find solutions to make sure, as Xavier mentioned earlier, there's no mismatches. So I really appreciate that. There's some freedom there as well.
I totally agree with you, Luis.
Yeah, if there's time, I'd love to add on. Yeah, those are such great insights. I can bring in some more insights from the development side and some of the challenges that we face. I think one of them is balancing when to wait, especially thinking about all the new and evolving technologies that could seemingly resolve a lot of these mismatches on day one of release. And then also balancing that with when to act, because people are experiencing those mismatches today. So a lot of the, I think, unique opportunities that Immerse gets to consider when it comes to these challenges and just opportunities to continue to delve into accessibility are the diverse learning styles and the abilities of our members. So an example is like clear text and alphabetical characters for one language may be easily read by one learner, but when it comes to another learner, right, it could be challenging if they have dyslexia. Some learners process colors differently, which impacts a lesson specifically on describing objects and colors and all those characteristics, as well as I think it's also just an accessible feature when we think about members who are really trying to solidify their learning and the benefits of applying that knowledge before and after class to really get those to stick. So there's a lot there within the context of education that's super exciting to explore and make more equitable for everyone.
And after all, it's a civil right. I do not know a company who said, oh, 20% of my marketplace, I don't care. You need to address accessibility.
And beyond that, it's not just the person with a disability or disabled person, but it's their caregivers. It's their family members who also care about this and want to make sure that, you know, those that they love and that they care about are able to participate. So the market goes beyond some of the statistics. But to Xavier's point too, like that's the reason why from a universal design for learning perspective, we love options. Right? We love choice because what works for one person may not work for another. And so being able to turn on things and turn them off depending on what your needs and preferences are. And going back to your point, Christian, about being human-centered, right? And considering the range of people that are going to use our devices and solutions, we want to make sure that there's lots of options there.
Thank you. And all right. So we've asked that you share an example of an XR experience or project that you've worked on that successfully prioritized accessibility and equity and what made it successful. And Christian, I think you shared this one, right?
Yes, I'm working on a digital twin of a chemistry, agri-food, and pharma and process engineering laboratories. And we have developed accessibility settings. Thanks to the teacher, thanks to our partner members. You can grab it in the Meta store also, and you have free modules. You can test it. And some of the challenge we have is after testing with students, we found that, and I will take your example of being creative. We found that some students confuse their index finger with their middle finger. And to help them, we have designed magical colored ring on the glove. And when you need to grab some things, it is overlay in blue. So we have a blue ring on the middle finger. And when you can interact with some things, it's overlay in yellow. We choose yellow and blue color because color blind people, someone who have color blindness, will always distinguish blue from yellow. And we have also filter color. And it works a lot because with this ring, our students are not concentrated on which button I need to press to interact or to grab some things. They are focused on what they are doing, and they are learned by doing with this. We have also magical laser and every module are tested seated. So someone with a wheelchair can grab something who fall on the ground without bending too much. We can change also the type of the text with dyslexic font, with Verdana. Dyslexia is very complicated. You need to give a lot of choice of type to let the user choose. But I'm very curious to see what Luis and Xavier has done.
Well, I'll pass it on to Xavier because I'm not a developer. I work with developers, so Xavier, I'm interested to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, beyond a lot of the sense-related accessibility options, right? Our movement comfort settings, our one-handed mode, which we've been exploring this past year during Immerse's annual Hack Week. One of the accessibility systems that I've been really excited to work on and consider have been the larger accessibility systems that delve into a lot of the class management. So this is our observer mode. It allows new trial members to jump into lessons and observe the interactions between guides and current members. So like auditing a class, but with the privacy of being hidden to other students. Accessibility and equity might not be the first thing that comes to mind when considering the ability to audit classes. With our model, it seems very logical to offer that. But to me, I think this felt entirely like an accessibility and equity feature beyond the obvious benefit of, hey, we're bringing people into classes and allowing them to try giving access to them. I think one of the important things about this feature is our mindset. We were very accessibility first. We considered how much of our lesson tools these new learners should be able to interact with as a platform that also supports desktop members, ensuring that these observers could clearly integrate into classes and across all these devices. We thought about how observer mode would also integrate into some of our other accessibility systems. So we have an in-lesson help request and ensuring that our guides have the tools to manage both current and prospective learners. As you can see on the top, there's our desktop mode. The bottom left is our VR mode, and on the bottom right is the guide view. I think some of the things that made this feature so successful was how we approached it through the accessibility lens, which became evident in our testing, both our guides and within our own team. Many of our teammates were interested in learning new languages and deeply understood the challenges that new learners face, which I think that level of empathy is so important. And yeah, just important to envision what learners will go through. And I think that really enforces just accessibility overall. I think another sign of this success was the feedback that we received from our members. That feedback cycle has been so important for involving our members into the features that they're using. And it was encouraging to see our members coming back to us and being like, hey, what about if we involve this for like leveling up to another class, or existing members who are interested in exploring another language? I think having that direct engagement indicates successful accessibility features.
And I'll just add that one of the things we're trying to do with Recite for our community, our advanced technological education community, is bring together solutions like this into a repository where if you're a faculty member, you can search depending on what you want to teach, what area you work in. You can search for XR experiences that are well matched to the subject or the topic that you want to teach. And then maybe we can tag them so that, we can tag accessible ones so that, again, it addresses the issue that you brought up, Christian, about people not knowing about what's out there. So part of our work with Recite is building a repository. The other thing that we're working on is learning management system integration, because we've heard from a lot of people that's an issue in kind of rolling out the interoperability of some of these virtual reality or extended reality solutions and how they can be incorporated into learning management systems, which the people that I work with in community colleges and in institutions of higher ed, they often use, those learning management systems to manage their courses. And so that integration, that interoperability is really important. So stay tuned. Visit recitexr.org to keep up with our work in that area.
So glad you're mentioning this about sharing resources, because my next question is really, are there any emerging technologies, standards, or frameworks that you believe are advances accessibility and equity in XR? And maybe Luis, if you want to.
Yeah, if you advance to the next slide, we've kind of put our heads together here and come up with a very nice list of resources. I think the XR Association Developers Guide, for those of you that are developers out there, or even if you're not a developer, I think it's worth looking at, because chapter 3 is dedicated to inclusive design. And so it provides lots of great information, some guidelines to follow. And then if you develop for Meta, right, for the Meta platforms, they have accessibility virtual reality checks to make sure that, the solutions you're developing work for somebody without sight, who's not able to hear, who only has one arm or one hand, and so on. So it's a nice way to check to make sure your experiences work for everybody. And I think, Christian, you added this, but really important,
Yes,
the XR accessibility
yes,
user requirements. So maybe you can speak to
exactly,
that.
exactly. It's the future standard, and I can give you a breaking news. The WCAG is discussing of changing web page to view, the word view, and it will be, and changing just this word, it means that the W3C and the WCAG are thinking about mobile app and XR also. And what I like with the XOR is that you can see the complexity, because mixed reality and augmented reality and virtual reality are different beasts. You can have some things who's working in virtual reality and who won't work in augmented reality or in mixed reality. And I have XR access. The BBC has done very interesting research, and there is the XR for Europe for the code of conduct in XR, and it's in French. It's the France immersive learning, and it's how to improve accessibility of immersive learning course in French. It's in French.
C'est pas un problème.
Yes, download it and translate it.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end, so I'll go with the last question. So what advice would you give to designers, developers, and organizations that are just starting to think about accessibility and equity in their XR projects? And where should they focus their efforts first? Xavier, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, when it comes to accessibility and equity, I think we all know it's very easy to feel overwhelmed because there's so much to account for, so many people that we want to account for. We've defined earlier, I think part of accessibility and equity is that effort towards avoiding those mismatches. But yeah, we know that accounting for everything, everyone, all at once on day one is pretty impossible. So I think it's important to start with your community and meet each other where you are in that moment. Identify what's preventing your members from feeling fully immersed into your shared world. Take your own classes, play your own games, observe others engaging, and notice where they get stuck. I think once you have a solid understanding of that, it's important to create guidelines tailored to your community's needs and making accessible thinking the default. This helps with that, those guidelines, because we want it to be an easy part of development and decision making. And lastly, this is small, but I think this is important. It's using more community language. Your community, your people. Like we've defined again earlier, accessibility and equity are worth the effort because they're for everyone. The more we embed ourselves in our communities, the easier it becomes to create that meaningful change together.
And I would second that. I would say engage the disability community. They have a lot to teach us in terms of being responsive to a range of different needs. And also sometimes as designers, we make assumptions. And so the disability community can check our assumptions to make sure that they're actually accurate. And so, nothing about us without us is a saying in the disability rights community. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, and together we can develop better solutions, right? Than just by, thinking about it as just a technical challenge. To me, it's a human challenge. And so we need to all work together to find solutions to them.
I can't say more. All accessibility setting needs to be built by, tested with, and for people with disability. Because it's a human right, despite what happens in those days.
And I'll add one last thing is to advocate with platforms to have them build more accessibility supports into their development toolkits, because that has really brought us forward in other platforms, whether it's mobile, whether it's websites. When you build it into the development environments, that really helps. And so we want to encourage the Metas of the world, unities and so on. Make sure you build accessibility into the development toolkits.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your insights. And if there are no questions, please don't hesitate to send any question. Thank you so much again for sharing. I have one question here. I wanted to ask you if there were any tools or strategies that you use in order to make sure that the designs that you're implementing are actually responding to the needs of the communities or the people who need it. How do you do that to make sure that they fit the needs?
It's a very complicated question because every person is different.
Mm-hmm.
That I do not have an answer for you. You can take assessment, you can take measure, but accessibility, when you fix some things, there is a breach who's opening on the other side. So it's always a project. You need to work on it. Always, all the time, the work needs to be rethink, to be creative. And that's, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I can tell you.
Sophie, I would say that development needs to be iterative, meaning let's not wait until the final step and add accessibility at the end, but bring accessibility into like earlier steps of the design process. Even the earliest prototypes, the earliest wireframes, what have you. Make sure that you're thinking about accessibility, because I use the metaphor of a blueberry muffin. Right? You can't just take a regular muffin and throw a bunch of blueberries on top of it and call it a blueberry muffin, which is often what we do when we're developing, right? We wait until the end and then we ask people, does this work or not? What we want to do is bake in those blueberries from the beginning. And that's part of engaging different people, different users, so that we're gaining those insights early on, because that's going to save us a lot of time and a lot of learning if we do that as early as possible.
And we have another. Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that. I completely agree. In development, we have the saying fail fast. So just aligns with that iterative process. Like, try something, test it. If it doesn't work, cool, learn from it, go on to the next test. And then, keeping your community involved is so important for ensuring that we get those blueberries to bake.
Have I made everybody hungry? Hopefully it's close to your mealtime.
It is. All right, last question we have. How have accessibility regulations and purchasing requirements been applied to XR that you've seen so far?
I would just say yes to that question. Make sure that it's considered doing procurement. So if you're not developing XR solutions, make sure that accessibility is part of your procurement policies and that you're clear about the standards, the guidelines, the best practices that you want to hold those that you're purchasing from accountable. Because ultimately, we want to pursue a market model for this, right? Where we speak with our dollars, we speak with our purchasing decisions. So all I can say is yes, make sure that it's part of procurement, that there are accessibility questions as part of the procurement process.
And I can add that in Europe, in June, we will have the European Accessibility Act. And it's software, it's website, it's app, and XR, immersive technology, are app. So they are under the European Accessibility Act. You need to address accessibility.
Xavier, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I agree. Yeah. Make it part of procurement, make it with everyone that's involved in the process, show that you care about it and that it's a priority, continuing to just embed it into all the systems that we work with day to day. But yeah, I agree.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing again. And thank you all for attending the session.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye. Thank you.